everyone, and welcome to my latest movie and television show review video, where I talk about the movies and television shows that I completed watching in the last week. I only have a few to get through this week, 2 television shows that I wrapped up, and 3 movies that are all connected together because it's all a trilogy, and I think I already gave away what I'm going to be talking about given current releases that are coming out. But we're going to start with the television shows, and we're going to go... Okay, there were 2 shows, like I said, there were 2 shows I finished watching this week, and they are on opposite sides of the spectrum as far as content and what's acceptable for children goes. So let's go with the adult content first. I completed watching a show that I have a lot of fond memories of, and one that I would probably say is still my favorite show in HBO history. I know Game of Thrones is high up there for a lot of people, but considering Game of Thrones dropped the ball with its final season, I'm going to give it to Tales from the Crypt. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a horror movie fan. I like monsters and ghosts and all that crazy shit. So an anthology series about all these individual stories featuring all these supernatural elements and other horror elements as well. It wasn't strictly supernatural stuff, as shown in the episode Yellow, one of the more celebrated episodes featuring the horrors of war, basically. But Tales from the Crypt... it really did, if I had to describe it to anybody, it was the Twilight Zone of the 90s in a sense, because it was this similar format where it's a bunch of standalone stories, there's not a story arc or regular characters outside of the host, in this case being the legendary Crypt Keeper, voiced by John Cassier, and with that wonderful puppet that they used, that got better after the first season, but... Wonderfully designed puppet, great voice, a lot of cheesy jokes. It's like they exhausted literally every pun they could possibly use. Every horror or death-themed pun, they used literally all of them throughout the course of the show. But the puppet's so great and the voice is so great, you can't help but kind of get swept up in how hilarious he is, even if the jokes are, on paper, they're terrible, but it's like, yeah, but he's so great. I love him. But aside from the host, there are no regular characters, and it's all standalone stories. The stories are derived from EC Comics, not DC Comics, but EC Comics series from decades prior, including Tales from the Crypt and various other series as well. And they decided to go with the title Tales from the Crypt, which I believe also got a movie in the 70s, which I've never seen. I should probably add that to my... October Halloween viewing this year, but the series, like I said, it had a Twilight Zone type of vibe to it, where it is individual stories, typically ending on some kind of a twist with some jerk getting his comeuppance or something along those lines. There was a lot of that, but what this show offered that a lot of other shows of its kind did not. Of course, when this show started, I was only like 4 years old, so I didn't really get into it until years later, actually, just when I was starting to watch it while my parents weren't paying attention, just when I was starting to get into watching it, the show was ending. So we're talking like season 6 or 7, which was probably the show at its weakest overall. But I did watch like horror-themed shows intended for children when I was younger, like Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps and those type of shows. Actually, with Goosebumps, I like the books more, but that's another discussion entirely. But I watched those shows, but when I saw Tales from the Crypt, it blew those other shows away because it was on HBO, it operated without restrictions, and because of that, they were able to get away with cursing, violence, and nudity. And you felt like you were watching these mini horror movies for real, and there was the gloves are off and you can do whatever you wanted, and that type of freedom created a lot of great episodes and a lot of great stories for the show. When I think of some of my absolute favorites, I already mentioned Yellow, which was the one about set during World War I, featuring Kirk Douglas and his son, playing father and son in this story. I don't want to give anything away, but it's probably the most normal and the least supernatural of all the episodes of Tales from the Crypt, but it's exceptionally well made. And, I mentioned Kirk Douglas. The star power featured in this thing was crazy. It felt like they were tripping over the amount of stars they were able to get to be a part of this thing. One of the best episodes involved Demi Moore marrying Jeffrey Tambor, and her selfish reasons for doing so, and ultimately her getting her comeuppance in that whole deal. One of probably my number one favorite episode is the one with John Lovitz playing the struggling actor, and he gets that tryout with Macbeth, or Hamlet, sorry, it was Hamlet. And the twist on that one is absolutely amazing, and I dare not spoil it. It's great, but that was probably my favorite episode. There's the one with the mom that killed her husband, and it's on Christmas Eve, and Santa Claus, or there's a serial killer that's dressed up like Santa Claus that's trying to break into her house and kill her and her daughter, and she can't call the cops because her husband's dead body is on the premises still. She hasn't cleaned up her work yet. So that was the second episode, I believe. So that was a great one. And that's the great thing about the show. The star power. Oh, another one of my favorites, the ventriloquist episode with Bobcat Goldthwait and the legendary Don Rickles, which also has an amazing twist in it. A twist that I wasn't expecting, to be perfectly honest, the first time I watched it. But the show is so good, and again, with anthology shows, kind of like Black Mirror, not everyone's going to be a gem. There are going to be some downers, and there were some downers. I think the first episode I ever saw was King of the Road, with a very young Brad Pitt in there, one of his earlier roles. And it hooked me on the show, but going back and rewatching it, I was kind of like, it's not that great compared to some of the other ones. It's kind of interesting that the one that got me hooked on the show is actually one of the weaker episodes. Season 7 is notoriously looked down on because the production moved to London, which on paper isn't a bad thing, but for whatever reason, it didn't translate to great episodes. And I think part of it, by that point, 7 seasons, they'd pretty much exhausted the well. So I think a lot of the episodes felt like they were just kind of treading water and repeating, even though they had some big name stars and some stars with potential, like a young Ewan McGregor. Bob Hoskins was in one. Natasha Richardson was in one. So great talents involved in it, I think. But by that point, I think the series had pretty much run its course, and it was time to end. I should also note I did not watch the animated series that was made for kids, Tales from the Crypt Keeper. I've never watched it, never seen it, because I figured, I've seen the real show, so why bother checking out the animated one? But maybe one day I'll check that out too, who knows. It ran for 3 seasons, so it's maybe there's some good stuff there, some hidden gems. But going back and watching the show, like I said, there are some duds sprinkled in, but when you have an anthology series, it's okay to have the occasional dud as long as you're delivering the goods when it comes to those really, really good episodes. Not every episode of the Twilight Zone was a winner. There was that one season where they experimented with hour-long episodes, and I don't think any of those worked for me. And then the last season, they really struggled, because at that point, they pretty much exhausted all their story ideas. When they got to a point where I was like, are they doing the evil doll thing again? Because they did it multiple times throughout the course of that show. So you're allowed to have your duds. It's just when you come through, it better be good. And in Tales from the Crypt's case, when they had a good one, they really, really hit it out of the park. And again, the fact that it was on HBO, the fact that they were able to get such big name stars involved in it, even on the director side of things, Arnold Schwarzenegger directed an episode, which there's a sentence I would never expect in a million years to ever say. Arnold Schwarzenegger directed something. You had Richard Donner, and I believe, Spielberg wasn't attached to it. There's somebody else I was thinking of. But anyway, they had a lot of big names attached to this thing. And a lot of great talents, both in front of and behind the camera. And when you're on HBO and you've got the freedom to do whatever you want, typically that's going to lead to a lot of creative freedom and yield some pretty good stuff. And that's pretty much what we got here. I thought it's a legendary show. It's great. It's wonderful. And, we're coming close on October, getting close to Halloween season. So if you're looking for something to watch and you have not watched Tales from the Crypt, I think there are some great episodes in there that are definitely worth watching. Like I said, later seasons, when you start getting into season 6 and 7, it falters a little bit. Although not every episode is bad. I should also note there are a couple of gems in there. But generally, your stronger episodes are in seasons 1 through 3 or 4. That's really where the really, really good stuff is. But that's my recommendation, Tales from the Crypt. I love it. I think it's great. And if you haven't checked it out, go ahead and do so. Now, Tales from the Crypt gave us horror, cursing, sex, all this other stuff. And like I said, we're going to go to the complete opposite extreme here with a show I finished watching on Disney+, finished rewatching because I watched it as a kid, The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which is about as kid-friendly as anything could possibly be. And this is a show that, when you're a kid, Winnie the Pooh is one of those big characters that you get exposed to pretty early, I feel like. And Disney, there's a lot of criticism with all the things that they've handled and all the different properties that they've handled. I criticized their new Muppet Show. I didn't really like it. I watched 3 episodes, and that was pretty much it. I haven't watched it since. It just didn't do it for me. Star Wars, I could scream up and down about how that's been mishandled. But when it comes to Winnie the Pooh, which was handed to them in the 60s based off the books, I feel like they've protected Pooh pretty well. Like, Winnie the Pooh is one that I think they've handled with a lot of respect. And they've kept it mostly pure. They haven't done much to really go out of their way to really modernize Winnie the Pooh. They keep him timeless and pure. And I feel like that's commendable on Disney's part. They understand. Of all the properties they've mishandled, like, Winnie the Pooh is one that they understand. I'm not sure why that is, but that one they've been smart enough to kind of leave alone. And I haven't rewatched it since I first saw it, but about a year ago I saw Christopher Robin, and of all the live-action Disney movies that are terrible, like, I can go down the list. Beauty and the Beast, hated it. Aladdin, good lord, that movie was awful. Maleficent, that was garbage. Garbage. And it got a sequel because there is no God. But all of those are bad. Christopher Robin, really, really good, and nobody saw it. Like, that's the one that deserved $1 billion, and nobody saw it. By the time Lion King came out, I was pretty much done. I'm like, no, I'm not watching it. No, I refuse. I refuse to watch another one of these. But if they were all as good as Christopher Robin, they'd probably be okay. But Christopher Robin is the lone good one that I've seen of their recent slew of live-action reboots, remakes, whatever. But I'm using it to illustrate the point that Winnie the Pooh typically treated pretty well, and they've always pretty much kept him kid-friendly and haven't done anything to really try and modern. Actually, the show I'm about to talk about probably is the most modern that Pooh's ever been whenever they ventured outside of the 100-acre wood. But yeah, Winnie the Pooh, I feel like it's one of those things that you get exposed to at a very young age, and it's perfect for kids. Like, it's perfectly sweet, perfectly innocent, and you get these little misadventures with these wonderful stuffed animal characters. It's very sweet and very nice. And New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh really sticks out to me because I know they had done the theatrical shorts and the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh movie, Disney did, first with the original voices and that original song and everything. But the version of Pooh that sticks out in my mind from my childhood is this show, New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. And I think what I admire the most about it, especially on this rewatch, it is so smartly written for kids, which is harder to do than people think. Like, it's very hard to make something for kids that's legitimately, like, intriguing and kind of intelligent. And you feel like you're teaching a lesson to the kids without beating them over the head with it. Just to give a couple of examples, probably the best remembered episode from the show is the one where Rabbit raises the baby bird. And I think that if you're a parent now, I think that episode probably resonates a little bit harder. But they give you this nice, sweet little emotional story with Rabbit raising this baby bird, and it's giving the kids that watch it kind of like a life lesson about growing up, leaving the nest, and how they're probably gonna go through that themselves when they're parents. So, and that seems to be the episode that everybody remembers, and it's worth remembering because it's shockingly well made. Another episode that always stood out to me, because as a kid, I was kind of like, wait, how do they know? How do they not know what's going on here or whatever? But it's weirdly brilliant in how it's presented. In this one episode where Tigger is so dirty and the rest of the crew is like, look, we need to give him a bath because he's filthy. But they wash him so well that his stripes come off. And the crew, Pooh and Rabbit and Piglet and all them, they no longer recognize Tigger because Tiggers have stripes and this guy doesn't have stripes. So they don't recognize him. And Tigger starts to have an identity crisis. He was like, well, maybe I'm not Tigger. And he has to try and, like, find himself because he feels like without his stripes, he's lost his identity. And I'm like, that's shockingly deep for a kid show, but it's presented in a way that's digestible for children. And I think that's some of the nicest praise I can give to the show. It's also well animated. It's done by the same people that did, like, Gummy Bears and DuckTales and all of those type of shows. So it looks great. But it's a surprising amount of sweetness and heart and smart ideas that they were able to inject into this thing. And I think the show is pretty timeless. Now, if you're an adult watching the show now cold and you have no attachment to Winnie the Pooh or this series, I don't think there's anything here for you. This is a show that's strictly made for children. And I'm okay with that. I think that that's an important thing for kids to have, because one of my criticisms of modern animation, I feel like they make them for adults first, or like the Tumblr crowd. I feel like most animation is geared towards them specifically, and I wonder, like, is there anything out there that's made strictly for kids anymore? Like, where is the new Adventures of Winnie the Pooh of this generation? Because I feel like all cartoons today, like the fan base, it's all like hyperactive adults that probably need to go outside more. But and I'm being as nice as I possibly can here. But I look back on something like this and giving it a rewatch, and again, I don't have kids, and I just watched it on my own. I was able to appreciate it because I remembered how the show made me feel when I was an adult. So if you're looking for a nostalgia rush, I think the show is worth watching. If you have kids and you're looking for something on Disney Plus to watch, I think this is a very, very good series for your kids to watch. And it's cute and adorable, and you love all the characters and everything. So I think kids would really get a kick out of it. I also want to point out that the theme song, the intro song, is awesome. And probably better than the original Winnie the Pooh song. The Winnie the Pooh, yeah, that whole song from the original shorts. I think I like this song better, though. It's kind of badass. So if you look it up, you can find the intro on YouTube. It's great. Or just watch it on Disney Plus. It's one of the few times I've marathoned a show and I didn't hit the skip intro button. Because, sometimes like, all right, I'm trying to watch all these things, and just to make it easier, I'll skip the intro. But that theme song is so great. I'm like, nah, I kind of want to listen to it again. And I never skipped the intro once out of 50 episodes, I think. So yeah. And as far as the characters go, it's really funny. As a kid, Tigger was my favorite because he was the hyperactive, fun, bouncy one. As an adult, I think Eeyore's my favorite because he's just a walking poster child for depression. It also helps that Optimus Prime, Peter Cullen, is doing the voice, so I have that little connection there too. And the voice cast is very, very good in this. You got Paul Winchell doing Tigger. Paul Winchell was a great voice actor. I remember him most for Dick Dastardly. He was that character from anybody who's a Hanna-Barbera fan. But he was also the voice of Tigger before passing it off to Jim Cummings. Jim Cummings takes over as Winnie the Pooh and Tigger. And he's basically made Winnie the Pooh his role. Like, I think the original voice actor's name was Sterling Holloway, and he had passed away before this series was even conceived. But I think Jim Cummings has kind of taken over as the official voice of Winnie the Pooh for a lot of people. He's just really good at it. And, I think the show's really, really good. Again, if you're an adult that has no attachment to Winnie the Pooh, there's nothing here for you. But again, if you have kids, I highly recommend showing them this because I think it's great and I think it's wonderful. And as far as strict kids shows go, like shows that are made strictly for kids, I think it's about as good as you can possibly get. And especially if that like 4 or 5 year old range, I think it's adorable. I think it's wonderful. And if you got Disney Plus, just put it on for the kids and hopefully they'll enjoy it too. Now we're going to close out this week's video with a trilogy of films, a series that has now become a trilogy thanks to the latest release, and you already know what I'm talking about. So let's just go ahead and be excellent to each other and talk about Bill and Ted, a film series that I never imagined I would ever call a trilogy, but here we are, with the latest release of Bill and Ted Face the Music, those two wonderful best friends for life, those rock stars of legend now have a film trilogy. And obviously I was the perfect age to watch Bill and Ted because I was 6 years old when the second movie came out. So I was right there, right when Bill and Ted was at its peak. And I grew up with both the two original movies, Excellent Adventure and Bogus Journey. And I have a lot to say about them. And with the new film being released on streaming, I thought, why don't I just watch the first two films to kind of match up with the third one. So let's start off with film number 1, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, a movie that Red Letter Media, in their review, of course I'm ripping off Red Letter Media by reviewing these, because anybody who's followed my channel for any length of time, I always rip off my betters. Always. But Red Letter Media rightly compared this film to Back to the Future in a sense, because it feels like something that kind of was inspired by Back to the Future, but then they took it and just turned it into its own unique thing. The teenage time travel element, and then just turned it into this wacky, dopey, wonderful adventure. And when I look back on movies like the Bill and Ted movies, both of them, it makes me nostalgic for those uniquely stupid movies, or smart dumb. I'm going to coin the phrase smart dumb, movies like this, where on the surface, it's a stupid teen comedy around a ridiculous premise of two not stoners, but they act like stoners, surfer dudes, time traveling to get an A on their history report. And that's the movie, basically. And it's, on the surface, it's very, very dumb, but when you see, like, all the different things that they do with the premise, and how it turns into, like, this bizarre ensemble cast of Bill and Ted with all these historical figures, like Socrates, as they incorrectly refer to him as throughout the entire movie, Beethoven, I think that's what they call him, Sigmund Freud, Joan of Arc, Abraham Lincoln, Genghis Khan, and all these other characters to put on the most amazing, rad history report of all time. Which seems like overkill, but I'm trying to think, like, as an educator, if I was an educator, looking at this report where it's just them bringing all these figures out and having them speak to a bunch of kids, I'd be like, you're covering, like, all of history. There's no real focus here. It's just you bringing in a bunch of people and talking about a bunch of unconnected points in time. But when you look at how funny it is, and how charming the two leads are, Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves are so likable as those two characters, because they're so upbeat and positive all the damn time. And, the Erica Dard thing, and their love and their passion of music, and the way they get along with each other so well to the point that they're inseparable, to how they're able to buddy up to all these historical figures and make friends with them. Like, I love their interactions with Billy the Kid and Socrates, who are like their two, really, those are the first two they meet, and those are like their two best friends throughout the film. And, of course, Napoleon's kind of a dick, as we see in his subplot, which some of the funnier bits in the movie are Napoleon being left to his own devices. And, it's just so much fun to watch, even though it's dumb. And I kind of miss those type of movies where, on the surface, it seems idiotic, but then you watch it, it's like, I'll be damned if I didn't have fun with that. And I was talking with somebody about this the other day, and he was like, how I know the 80s and the 90s were awesome? And I'm like, how? Even our bad movies, because the Bill and Ted movies back in the day were considered like bad movies, and it was just dumb schlock for children who were too stupid to have any kind of appropriate critique of things. I think Bill and Ted Face the Music might be the best reviewed of the three Bill and Ted movies, and I think that's because those kids that grew up with Bill and Ted are now critics themselves and now watching a new Bill and Ted movie. But, well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. But anyway, he was talking about how, like, dude, our bad movies were awesome. Our quote-unquote bad movies were amazing. Whereas, most movies that come out now, it's either, if they're bad, they're, like, dull bad. They're not even fun bad. And finding something fun bad is even that, like, even like a modern-day Howard the Duck is hard to come by these days. But Bill and Ted, I don't classify that as so bad it's good. I legitimately am entertained by these movies. I think they were solid, fun, enjoyable movies centered around two very likable characters going off on all these wacky misadventures. And again, I think what really makes the movie for me are the two leads and all the historical figures that they get, because those are some of the best parts of the movie, especially when they're all like running around in the mall and trying to acclimate themselves to modern day society. And it is absolutely delightful. It's an absolutely delightful movie, and a great introduction to two great characters. Now, I remember Fox Kids had the Bill and Ted animated show. I remember watching that when I was younger. And so Bill and Ted got like a certain level of popularity. Of course, back in those days, like, if your movie was even a moderate hit, you were going to get an animated series. It was like clockwork. It was bound to happen. And if it wasn't an animated series, you were going to get like a live action series like Uncle Buck did. Like, the fact that Animal House and Uncle Buck got TV shows, it just drives me up the wall. I can't believe that somebody thought that those would be good ideas. But Bill and Ted got two shows, the animated one, which I remember enjoying, and if I recall correctly, Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves actually voiced Bill and Ted in the movie, or in the animated show, and then you had the live-action show, which I never watched and I've heard is terrible, so I'll just take everybody's word for it, but Bill and Ted they were a part of a lot of people's childhoods back then, and it's easy to see why. They were just so much fun, and they're fun to imitate with their super cool 80s surfer dude lingo. Excellent! All that stuff. It's fun. They're just fun. And how can you not, like hating Bill and Ted is like hating puppies. I feel like, how could you be mad at those two? They're just so happy and so passionate about stuff, and they're just wonderful, and I really enjoy those characters. That said, that brings me to the second movie, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. This was at a time where doing a sequel to a comedy was almost a death wish, because a lot of comedies that got sequels were typically pretty bad. I think back to Analyze This, really good movie. Analyze That, not so great. Whole 9 Yards, pretty good. Whole 10 Yards, not great. And there was almost and sequels had, at the time, a big stigma against them anyway. But back then, it almost felt like a death wish to do a sequel to a comedy. It's like, oh, this is going to be so bad. Because how do you recapture the magic? Well, in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, they not only recaptured the magic, I feel like they surpassed the original film. This is still, even after the third one, and I'm going to get into that, I feel like this is the best Bill and Ted movie and represents Bill and Ted at its best. It really goes into the whole, their destiny is to become, the musicians that shape the future society and bring about a utopia. And that's really expanded on here as we have, a villain. We actually have a villain in this movie who is sick and tired of living in the future that they've created. His name is Denomalous, and he has connections to Bill and Ted's mentor, or their guide of sorts, Rufus, played by George Carlin, the legendary George Carlin, who is remarkably straight in these movies. You would think that George Carlin would be a cut-up and be a comedic one-line spouting machine in these things, but he's not. He's actually very restrained and works as kind of that mentor guide figure. So I don't know if that's the director or the writers doing that, or if Carlin understood. It's no, the boys, they're the funnies, and I need to be the serious one when I interact with them. And he's barely in the second movie, but it's remarkable how restrained George Carlin is. Not that he was a zany comic or anything, but you would think that like how he is in Dogma, that Kevin Smith movie, where he'd be spouting a bunch of one-liner type of jokes to put over that he's a hell of a comedian. But or even Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, the rules of the road. You'd think he'd be something along those lines, but no, he's fairly straightforward in this, which I appreciate. But anyway, so Denomalous sends the evil robot Bill and Ted to Bill and Ted's time to murder them to prevent the future from ever happening and ruining the Battle of the Bands event, which is where they're supposed to give the big speech that makes them heroes for all time and puts them on the map as musicians. And so the stakes are raised. And the time travel element is there, but it's mostly shoved to the background and not used as a crux of the story. What they did instead is have Bill and Ted go all over the afterlife, where they get killed. They actually get murdered by the evil robot Usses, who, by the way, are amazingly well played by Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves in this. Their evil versions of themselves are basically Bill and Ted, but sadists. They're almost exactly like Bill and Ted, to the degree where it would be easy to mistake them for the real Bill and Ted, except they say these really weird, fucked up, and awful things. It's oh yeah, they're the bad Bill and Ted. But yeah, they go through journeys to heaven and hell and duel with the Grim Reaper, who is a great character. Probably my favorite character in all of Bill and Ted is the Grim Reaper, because he's a wonderful reference / parody of the Seventh Seal, that foreign film, Swedish film, about playing death and playing chess with death. And it was so funny because I saw a few of those parodies when I was a kid Animaniacs did a similar thing where the Grim Reaper has like a Swedish accent, or at least some kind of an indistinct European accent. And I never understood why, and then I found out about that movie, and I'm like, oh, that's why. Okay, now it's super funny. Now it's doubly funny. But I think the Grim Reaper is an amazing character. I love him in this because he starts off super serious and then gets goofier and goofier as the movie progresses. And I think my favorite scene in all of Bill and Ted is the scene where they play the Reaper to get their lives back. And they play him in like Battleship and all these other things, all like modern games, or what was then modern games. And turns out Death is kind of a sore loser, which is hilarious. So I love that. Hell is one of the best versions of Hell ever put to film. I'm dead serious when I say that. And you get some of the best lines from Bill and Ted when they enter Hell. It's like, whoa, I really feel like we were lied to by our album covers. If I die, Bill, you get my Megadeth collection. But you're already dead. Oh, I guess they're yours then. It's just shit like that. It's just super, super funny. And Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves, I feel like they expanded their roles a little bit because, again, they play the evil robots. Alex Winter plays his grandma in his own personal hell, and probably the most terrifyingly hysterical scene in the entire movie. It's Bogus Journey really is. And then when they get to heaven and they meet the alien scientists who build the good robot us's, I mean, the whole thing is just insane and wild and crazy, but it felt right to kind of move away from the time travel thing and do a completely different thing. It's like, all right, we're going to kill Bill and Ted and they're going to go all around the afterlife, and that's going to be the crux of this movie, which I really enjoyed and appreciated. Then you get the big payoff at the end where they do become the heroes and they do become the chosen ones of legend that have the battle of the bands and the speech that unites everybody, and they succeed in everything. And they get their girlfriends back, the princesses, who are... I mean, they were recast in this movie and nobody noticed. So they're kind of like... They're there to be love interests for Bill and Ted, but they never really do anything. They're even part of the band. People forget that. So it's like they exist for the sole purpose of giving them love interests and no other reason. But yeah, they were recast in this film. They were recast in the third film, and I don't think anybody has noticed. Whereas if you recast the Grim Reaper, I think people would get upset because the Grim Reaper is such a great character. But anyway, Bogus Journey I think represents Bill and Ted at its absolute best. Has the funniest moments, has the most creativity, and is a payoff to what was established in the first film. And actually, had Bill and Ted ended here, I would have been completely okay with it because I liked how it ended. And I was like, all right, that's the ending. They became the chosen ones and they did it. But that moves us right along to the newest release, Bill and Ted Face the Music, which just dropped this weekend on Video On Demand. And I gotta be honest, I was not looking forward to this movie because I just thought, why are we making another Bill and Ted movie? It got an ending. I'm okay with the ending that we got. So when I'm watching this, they had to kind of tweak it a little bit. They didn't completely undo the ending from Bogus Journey, but they kind of tweaked the prophecy a little bit, where they were like, oh, they write the song that unites the world. I'm like, I don't remember Rufus ever saying that in the first two movies, but okay, they needed to justify a third movie, and within the first few minutes, I'm like, I'm on board with this. It's like, it's fun dumb. It's more of that fun dumb, and Bill and Ted are just too likable. And it's funny, when they did the Dumb and Dumber sequel, and I gotta be honest, I was never a huge fan of Dumb and Dumber. I was the perfect age to see that movie, but of Jim Carrey's work, that one I just kind of go, I wasn't a huge fan of it. And then when they did a sequel, I'm like, are you serious? What? Why? Why do we need a sequel? Who was demanding a sequel? And I never even bothered watching it because I just didn't care. But with Bill and Ted, I do have an attachment to those characters, so I'm like, all right, I'll give it a watch, and I'll watch the first two films to kind of remind me why I love them. And we'll just go along from there. And within the first few minutes, I'm like, I'm kind of digging this. It's just shameless stupidity, and I enjoy it. Now, Keanu, at this point in his life, post John Wick, Keanu Reeves seems to struggle a little bit recapturing the energy that he had back then that was so effortless. Because Keanu Reeves early on, he basically made a career out of being a moron. That was it. Movie recommendation, I haven't seen it in years, but if you haven't seen I Love You to Death, Keanu Reeves plays a drug addict in that movie, and he's hysterical. And wonderful. It's like 10 on drugs. That's basically his performance, and it's outstanding. But that was the type of role that Keanu would do back then. And whenever he tried to venture out of that, he typically sucked, like in Bram Stoker's Dracula, or even Speed. Like, Speed's a great movie, but he's like the weakest thing in that movie. And I'm like, really? We're making him an action star? But over time, with The Matrix and the John Wick movies, he's become kind of a badass, and you kind of view Keanu as like, oh my god, you don't want to fuck with this guy. And now he's going back to playing that surfer dude dumb guy, and he struggles a little bit recapturing it, but it's not a complete failure, I don't think. Alex Winter, on the other hand, this is like he just put on a pair of gloves. Like, he slipped right back into that role like he didn't miss a beat at all. It's the role he was born to play. But in this movie, they become obsessed because they've been trying for the last 25 years to write the song that will unite the world and achieve the future that has been promised and prophesized to them. And it's coming at the cost of their family and their connection to their wives. One of the best scenes in the movie is the couple's therapy. It's probably the best scene that the princesses were ever involved with. Unfortunately, they don't really do anything post that scene, or at least they don't do anything with what I felt that scene was conveying, where Bill and Ted are so attached and so joined at the hip that they don't individually pay enough attention to their wives. And it would have been nice to see, because as far as I can tell, I'm basing this off of memory, I don't think Bill and Ted have ever been separated from each other before. The closest was when they went into their own separate hells in Bogus Journey, and even that doesn't last long. So, but generally they are just absolutely connected at the hip. And it would have been nice to see like them play with that idea of like, all right, you guys need to spend some time away from each other and pay attention to your wives a little bit. And but there's a few subplots in this that ultimately feel a little pointless, feel a little shoehorned in, like with the princesses. That's a subplot that doesn't really go anywhere. The new Rufus, played by Kristen Schaal, who plays Rufus's daughter, who fulfills his function from the first two movies. There's kind of like a feud with her mother that doesn't really get resolved or are focused on all that much. So in some ways the movie's a little overcrowded in that regard, but when the focus is on Bill and Ted and them traveling through time to find the song that they wrote and steal it from themselves, those scenes are absolutely amazing because it's Bill and Ted just being dicks to other Bill and Teds. And their biggest enemies are quite literally themselves throughout the course of the film. And I gotta admit, I also like the daughters, Little Bill and Little Ted. They basically get a subplot where they repeat what happens in movies 1 and 2, where they're going around collecting historical musical figures to be in their father's band when they ultimately have to play this song. And those scenes are great. The Louis Armstrong impersonator is fantastic. I was like, oh, dude, I could watch a whole movie about that guy. He's great. But they put Hendrix in there. They put Mozart in there. They put Louis Armstrong in there. And it's they put a cave woman in there, the first one to ever play the drums, I guess, or percussion or something like that. And a lot of great gags like that. So I actually really enjoyed the daughters. They do end up going to hell because, again, we got to repeat that beat from the second movie. But see, this is where, like, I don't think they either didn't put as much thought into it this time around, or, again, I'm expecting them to put a lot of thought into Bill and Ted, but in the second movie, they get sent to hell because of the seance that banishes them to hell. Here, it's like the girls and all the other ones, they just wind up in hell right away, and I'm like, what did they do to deserve going to hell? That doesn't make any sense, but again, it creates some fun moments, regardless, and I like the two actresses playing the daughters are a lot of fun because they're basically just recreations of Bill and Ted. They absolutely took after their fathers, and the one playing Ted's daughter is so spot on, it's almost terrifying. Like how close she got it to being. She's closer to being Ted than Keanu Reeves is in 2020, but no, they were fun, and I liked them interacting with their dads, and I liked all the historical figures they collected. So those were the two main stories, and they were enjoyable. So overall, I did enjoy the movie. Now, I am going to criticize it for, and like I said, Bogus Journey veered away from the first movie, where it went into, okay, the first movie was a time travel movie, now we're going to go into heaven and hell and the afterlife. And I don't know what you would do for a third movie that's different, but here it feels like a little bit more into the member-berry side of things. Like, all right, we got to do the time travel thing. We got to do send them to hell thing so they can meet Death and bring Death back. And Death is great. It's great to have Death back, of course. He's wonderful. His introduction scene, they walk in on him and he's playing hopscotch by himself. And they're like, whoa, Death is playing hopscotch by himself. And he's cheating. And that's great. They also bring Missy back, and I haven't mentioned her yet, but Missy is one of the great running gags throughout all of these movies where she keeps marrying and divorcing people. And she starts off as someone who went to high school with Bill and Ted. She's a few years older. And they had crushes on her in high school. And she marries Bill's dad, and Ted kind of makes fun of Bill for it throughout the entire movie. And then in the second movie, she divorced Bill's dad and marries Ted's dad, and that creates some of Keanu Reeves' best lines. In the first movie, he's like, hey, Bill, remember when I asked your mom to prom? Shut up, Ted! And then in the second movie, it's like, whoa, I can't believe your mom divorced your dad and married mine. Shut up, Ted. And those exchanges are hilarious to me, and Missy is one of the funniest running gags in the whole thing. It's like, all right, who's she going to marry next? And at the end of the second movie, there's that newspaper headline during the montage that Missy's going to marry Chuck Denomalos, who's the villain of the movie. And I won't reveal who she's married in this one, but I kind of popped for it because it created some... It makes the family dynamic even weirder, which is kind of great and super funny. But, so it has like a lot of... I think it lacked a little bit in the originality department, but it provided a lot of fun. It brought back the right characters who were the best ones from the first two movies, namely Bill and Ted and Death, and Missy. And they couldn't bring back Rufus, but I felt like how they used Rufus in the film was fairly well handled. There's some signs of like a lower budget throughout the film, but again, it's Bill and Ted. You don't expect it to be extravagant anyway, so as long as you can have fun with these characters, I think you're doing something right. And I think that we were able to have fun with these characters, even though some of the writing could have been tightened up, some of the subplots could have been dropped, and they could have probably cut to the chase a little bit and not veer off in too many other different directions. What we got was pretty fun. I'd still say it's the weakest Bill and Ted movie to date. Hopefully there's no more after this. I like this put a nice little bow on it, I thought. But it is a highly enjoyable film, especially if you're a Bill and Ted fan and you like the first two movies. I think that you'll probably enjoy this movie as well. I think it was a nice return to Bill and Ted, and it's clear to me that the people working on it had fun doing it. Apparently, Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves have been wanting to make this, and the two writers, apparently they've been wanting to make this movie for like a decade, and they finally got it out. And it's solidly entertaining, and considering the times we're living in, you know, coronavirus, huge unrest in America, political bullshit because it's an election year, all that other negative nonsense. It's nice to have a movie that's just a feel-good movie about two guys that wants everybody to be excellent to each other, dude. And, you know, I'm not going to fault that. And it's like, you know what? It's fun. It had a little bit of nostalgia, but I think even removing my connection to the series from it, it is a fun, enjoyable, wacky movie. And I'm okay with that. I'm completely okay with that. So, yeah, weakest Bill and Ted movie, but overall still a lot of fun, and if you're a fan, I highly recommend it. So, that will conclude this week's movie and TV show review video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll have more for you as the weeks go on. How much longer are we going to be in lockdown? I don't know, but while we're going to be in lockdown and everything is locked down, I am going to have a lot more time to watch movies and TV shows, and I will be more than happy to review those things for you. So, I am done here. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all later.